Hello and welcome to our new lecture of the 16th century poetry presented to you by Dr. Ala, a lecturer at the Department of English Language, the College of Arts of Al Iraqiya University. This lecture is presented as part of the Google Classroom activity. Therefore, if you would like to raise any question, please comment on the video in our classroom and I will try to answer all questions as soon as possible. Without further ado, let's get started. Today we are going to discuss the fourth poem, which is by Henry Howard, the Earl of Surry. And the title of this poem is varies, so sometimes it's called the description of spring or the sooth season. I'm going to read the poem line by line and try to explain it as well, and end up as usual with the literary devices. في البداية يجب أن نعرف قليلا عن شاعرنا لهذه القصيدة وهو هنري هاورد. So I will talk first about background about the poet, and then we will move to the analysis of the poem. Henry Howard, Earl of Surry, was born in 1516 and died in 1547. Was the poet who invented the Shakespearean sonnet. يعني الشخص اللي اخترع واللي ابتكر ما يسمى الآن بالسونت الشكسبيرية. Sometimes known as the English sonnet. It was the Earl of Surry who made the innovation of ending the sonnet with a rhyming couplet, and in sooth season he uses this to brilliant effect. هو الشخص اللي قام بابتكار أو ابتداع ما يسمى بالكابلت اللي هي آخر بيتين كما شرحنا سابقا. But it is not as well known as it perhaps should be. We think the sooth season is also one of the finest English poems written about summer, though it also takes in the spring season too. It was first published in English poetry's first ever verse anthology, just called Turtle's Miscellany, Songs and Sonnets of Henry Howard, Earl of Surry, Sir Thomas Wit and others. In 1557, Wit appeared with the title Description of Spring, wherein each thing renews save only the lover. وهذا يدل على أهمية الشاعر والقصيدة على حد سواء. الآن سوف ننتقل إلى قراءة القصيدة، ثم بعدها سوف نتعمق في تفاصيل الأبيات والأدوات الأدبية المستخدمة فيها. Description of Spring or the Sooth Season by Earl of Surry, Henry Howard. The sooth season that bud and bloom forth brings, the green hath clapped the hill and eke the vale. The nightingale with feathers new she brings. The turtle to her make hath told her tale. Summer's come, for every spray now springs. The hart hath hung his old head on the pale. The buck in brake his winter coat he flings. The fishes fleet with a new repaired scale. The adder all her slow away she slings. The swift swallow pursueth the fly's smell. The busy bee her honey now she mings. Winter is worn, that was the flower bale. And thus I see among these pleasant things, each care decays, and yet my sorrow springs. The first quatrain, where the poet says, the sooth season that bud and bloom forth brings, with the green hath clad the hill and eke the vale. The nightingale with feathers anew she sings, the turtle to her make hath told her tale. In this quatrain, the poet starts by describing the sweet season, الموسم الرائع الجميل, which is summer. وأكيد summer يبتدي ب spring اللي هو الربيع، فيكون الربيع هو مدخل للصيف. لذلك طلائع الموسم الصيف هو
الربيع الذي ينبئ ببشرى قدوم الصيف. كون مناطق أوروبا عموما وبريطانيا بالأخص هي باردة جدا. Which could be either summer or spring, but it is generally interpreted as summer because they believe in England summer is the better season. And the fact that later in the poem the poet mentions the arrival of summer, the sweet season, is brought by blooming of flowers and the green grass covering the hills and vales. إنه طلائع بداية الموسم هي ظهور الزهور وتفتح الزهور وظهور الغطاء الأخضر للهضاب والسهول والوديان لهذه المناطق. يوصفها بتوشح الغطاء الأخضر. As he said, clad the hill and eke the vale. hill اللي هي التلال والveil اللي هي الوديان. Valley. The nightingale with feathers she sings. لذلك هذه النايتنجيل هو العندليب يصدح بغناء سعيد. turtle هنا ليست السلحفاة وإنما turtle dove اللي هي الحمامة. The turtle to her make hath told her tale. تخبر صديقها أو رفيقها الحكايات والقصص. هذه كلها دلالات سعادة ودلالات بهجة في قدوم هذا الموسم. Moving to the second quatrain, which says, Summer is come, for every spray now springs. The hart hath hung his old head on the pale. The buck in brake his winter coat he flings. The fishes fleet with a new repaired scale. هنا يعرض لنا الشاعر 4 صور. الأولى عندما يقول بأن الصيف قد أتى وكل غصن سوف تملأه الأوراق الخضراء. The hart, which is the male deer, hath hung his old head on the pale. بدأ يجدد قرونه القديمة. The buck in the brake his winter coat he flings. It's another type of deer that takes off all the hair away in order to renew it. So he compares the hair of that animal to the coat of human beings. The fishes flew with a new repaired scale. Even fishes change its skin, and that stands for the change in everything around the poet.
Now we come to the last quatrain and the couplet, where the poet says, The adder all her slop away she slings, the swift swallow pursued the fly's smell. The busy bee her honey now she mings, winter is born, that was the flower's bale. And thus I see among these pleasant things, each care decays, and yet my sorrow springs. In the third quatrain, the poet was like describing, and now the snake is shedding her skin. حتى الأفعى تغير جلدها. And the swallow pursues small flies. طائر السنون يطير خلفه أو يلحق الحشرات الصغيرة. And now the bees are busy with the honey gathering, and the evil winter is gone that tormented the flowers. والآن أن نحن مشغولا بجمع العسل كون الشتاء قد ولى وهو ما كان معذبا للزهور وموقفا. Finally, the last 2 lines, the couplet. آخر بيتين ينقض القصيدة بشكل كامل. He said, And thus I see among these pleasant things, each care decays and yet my sorrow springs. وأنا أرى الآن في هذه الصور كلها والأشياء الجميلة أن الأشياء السيئة تذهب بعيدا وتتلاشى، ولكن حزني هو الوحيد الذي يزهر وينمو يكبر. This is a contrast where the poet sees a difference between his feelings and what is surrounding him. And this is one of the main characteristics of Henry Howard's poetry. Now it comes to the analysis. This poem is very straightforward. The poet describes all the things that are happy and good, and that everything is starting anew. His sadness still remains. This tells us of the fact that no matter how happy the surrounding can be, if we are not content inside, we will still be sad. It is all a state of mind. مهما كان المحيط اللي نعيشه سعيد ومبتهج، لابد أن يكون هناك شيء في داخلنا يجري عكس التيار العام. إن لم تكن مندمجا مع المحيط السعيد الذي أنت فيه، فلا يمكن أن تشعر بالسعادة. In other words, Howard confesses that the liveliness of the new season contribute nothing to him, لا يشكل أي شيء له, and that although the season is sweet, it cannot fill the empty space inside of him over the loss of his love. مهما كانت السعادة التي تحيطه لا يمكن أن تملأ الفراغ الذي تركه المحبوب بابتعاده عنه. As the world continued to renew and regrow around him, the hope that he has to reunite with his lover degenerates. والعالم اللي حوله ينمو بينما الأمل الذي كان يعيش عليه للقاء محبوبه مرة ثانية بدأ يتلاشى ويضمحل. There are several examples of themes that we have talked about throughout the explanation of this novel. For instance, the sorrow of life, where this poet spoke about his sadness and how the surrounding is different from his inner feelings. The second one is loneliness. Since everything is happy around the poet, this means that he feels lonely. Therefore, he feels this way. The third is the renewal of all things. Everything is renewed and starting again with the coming of summer, except for the poet himself. We have the fourth as the comparison between life and nature. The poet compares his life to nature and how that everything in our life is reflected in the activities that surround us. Now let's move to the poetic devices, which is in the next slide. Let's start with the first one. Let's start with the rhyme scheme, which is consistent of AB, AB, the first quatrain, the second quatrain is the same, and the third is the same. However, the couplet is AA. In this poem, Howard lists several animals doing things that are related to the changing season as winter turns over into springtime and things in nature are becoming renewed. There is personification presented in certain phrasing, the sweet season. أعطى صفة sweet للموسم season. Has clad the hill in green. ألبس رداء أخضرا للتلال. The turtle tells her mate a tale. الحمامة تقص الروايات لرفيقها. The buck flings away his winter coat. The adder slings away her slop skin, etc. Additionally, the poet personifies his sorrow by saying that his sorrow springs. We also have alliteration through the poem where the words close to one another begin the same letter sound as one another. اللي هو الأحرف الأولى المتشابهة اللي هو alliteration مثل suit season, hearth hath, hung his, old head, busy bee, etc. There is also consonance in the repetition of sibilant consonant sounds in line 10. The swift swallow pursued the fly's smell. There is assonance in phrases such as hath clad the hill and eke the vale, where a vowel sound is repeated within the line. وهنا الأسونانس يعني تكرار حروف العلة في داخل المقاطع الصوتية. Finally, we have contrasts, which is between joy in the poem and the feeling of the poet, which is sorrow. This is the end of our lecture, and I hope to see you in the next one.